Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to enjoy the most creepiest part of the title. What really scary horror story really happened in your life or to the people you know? My closet door flew open one night during a thunderstorm. Directly across from my bed. I was 12 years old, and the leap/bolt I made from my bed was probably pretty impressive. I couldn't sleep in my room for about 2 weeks after that happened. The reason it even happened in the first place is because I had discovered a small compartment through my closet to a secret room next to mine. Basically, just an unfinished attic-type space with only wood beams and fiberglass. Again, through a weird small entryway in my closet. I didn't close the latch properly, and that panel banged up against and pushed open my closet door during a massive thunderstorm. Many years ago, pre-cell phone, a friend of mine got a call from the police, "Lock your doors, hide, we're on our way over." Her angry ex had hired someone to break into her house, make it look like a burglary gone bad, and kill her. Through a bizarre coincidence with equally bizarre timing, someone arrested for another unrelated drug charge offered a bigger fish if they let him walk. The bigger fish was that his friend had been hired to kill her. By the time they validated the story and identified the people, they were able to determine that the hired killer was likely already on the way to her house. In the few minutes between the phone call and the police arrival, he had started breaking into the house. A long sequence of perfectly timed unlikely events was the only thing that stood between her and certain death. Used to hang out in a field near some forests when I was younger. One time it was about midnight. One of my friends had recently had some love triangle type trouble, and the other guy involved wanted to fight him quite badly. Somehow he found out where my friend liked to hang out and rounded up about 10 of his friends to come find him and I'm guessing beat the fear out of him. I unfortunately happened to be there too. We saw about 4 cars park up on the road near the field and about 10 guys get out. I'm guessing they saw one of our phone lights, because next thing we know they shine what I can only describe as an industrial flashlight towards us. We just hear, "He's right there." So, we ran into the forest at 12 at night in the pitch black. It started to pour with rain. For an hour, we hid in bushes and crept around the forest, avoiding them as light from their torches shone through the trees. At times, they'd walk right past us, but not able to see us, because we were face down in the bushes and mud, lol. I was the victim of a chase, and it was terrifying. Got home at about 2 a.m. soaking and covered in mud. They never caught us though. All over a love triangle I wasn't bloody involved in. Scariest thing that ever happened to me. In high school, one of our classes went to a funeral home. While listening to the guide talk about the cremation machine, this girl in the class turns to my points at the machine then to me and says, "That's going to be you." She was mean for no reason. I never talked to her ever before or after that. A year later, she died in a house fire. Heater caught fire in the night, and then what was left was fully cremated in that same machine. Crazy. My grandpa told me a story about how some strange woman in disheveled clothing knocked on his door in the middle of the night speaking a strange language while he was staying in some hotel in Taiwan. From what I remember, he told me it was as if she was floating. I had some Final Destination thing happen with my ceiling fan once. Circa 2010 to 2011, I was playing WoW in my bedroom, just grinding some materials. I heard my fan started making a really weird noise, and for some reason had the urge to duck. At that moment, one of my fan blades came loose and shot straight into my dual monitors. Luckily, there was no damage, but I was watching my back for at least 2 weeks after that. I remember watching the press conference about them finally being caught and crying from relief. People were being shot all around us. Robin, the final victim, was a girl I had a few classes in high school. My dad would leave for work in the mornings around 5 a.m., so my mom and I would get up every morning to watch him get in his car and make sure he was able to leave safely. Those people would hide in bushes and shoot people just walking through their neighborhoods. I drive past their apartment when I go to visit my parents and I still think about it every single time, even though it's been almost 20 years since it happened, and they've renamed/remodeled the place multiple times since then. Truly terrifying not knowing if going outside your own home is going to get you killed or not. My cousin died of leukemia at 12 when I was a kid. We used to love playing around my grandfather's workbench in the basement when we would visit. It was always a central place, tinkering with whatever every evening after dinner instead of TV, and grandfather spent every night in there. The night after he died, my grandparents heard a commotion in the basement. They went down the next morning and his workbench was in disarray. Maybe not horror, but spookier. I grew up in a third world country, and in the beginning of the 90s a civil war broke out. We would often wake up to the screams of people getting beheaded by terrorists in the night. We would go up to the roof while my brother guarded the house holding a rifle. I would grab my dog and my brother would berate me for wasting time on her. She was stolen a few months later and I never saw her again. Her name was Lisa. I, 14F, was taking a road trip with my friends and family from Milwaukee to St. Louis. That night, there were storms everywhere in the Midwest, ranging from rain to hail to tornadoes. We were one of the unlucky ones. There were multiple tornadoes on our route, but since we were in the countryside, there was nowhere for us to stop and get shelter. I was just stuck in the car like an 11-year-old little girl, hearing the sound of tornado sirens, and thinking I was going to die. I know it doesn't sound that bad, but it traumatized me. Me, my brother, and my cousin were playing wrestling WWE style one day. My brother got me in a full Nelson and my cousin tackled him from behind, ramming me headfirst into the couch. Must have just been a really unlucky hit on the couch, because my limbs went tingly, and I couldn't draw breath. The scary part is that I could exhale, but couldn't inhale. So basically, I was lying on the ground limp, taking shorter and shorter breaths, like a dying fish. Thankfully after 30-ish long seconds I could breathe again, and the numbness went away. It was terrifying. When I was 18, I was drugged by a 6-foot-something, probably 200-plus lb man. He offered me a white substance, and I was at the time struggling with addiction and was known to say yes to anything. I had done some drugs with him before, but it hadn't been anything I couldn't handle. I did a line and immediately lost control of all of my limbs. What I thought was cocaine, which he knew was actually MXE. Basically, horse tranquilizers. He intentionally withheld that information from me. He knew what it was going to do to me. The reason I know it was intentional is because of the other women whom he had done the exact same thing to share their stories with me. He used those moments to take advantage of the fact that I literally couldn't move and raped me. I can remember trying my hardest to move my arms and hands to push him away, but no matter how hard I tried, they wouldn't move. Later, I learned the amount he gave me could have killed me, and I'm super lucky I didn't die. As I made my escape, he was chilling in his hammock. I still couldn't feel my arms, but ended up driving myself home through the middle of a valley with a big river running through and up a mountain. Thankfully, I made it home without crashing, but I was forever changed. He even stalked me for a week. I was so scared for a long time. This story ends with the bad guy dying from an overdose at a party almost 10 years later. I went to high school with a girl who, accompanied by her boyfriend, killed another girl, actually up the street from where I live now. They put her body in a rolling suitcase and dumped her in the river. Despite draining the entire bay, her body was never found. I'm horrified by the realization that the suitcase will likely rise to the surface someday. When I was around 14 years old, we had a neighbor 2 houses down that were foster parents. I always heard about them putting some of the troubled kids in cages as punishment and having them sleep on concrete. My friends and I would talk about it but never believed it to be true. One day, the FBI was everywhere up and down the block, closing off the street. We found out that one of the kids was acting up and wouldn't calm down, so they zip-tied him to a chair in the basement. When he wouldn't stop screaming, they put a zip tie around his neck to scare him into being quiet. They tightened it right away and ended up killing him. They found the boy buried in the basement under newly poured concrete. I came home from my homecoming dance. It was 2 a.m. In high school, I was a pretty blue-eyed blonde. I went to hang my coat in the closet and heard something brushing against the front door. Thought it was the wind blowing the fall wreath. Walking to my bedroom, I realized earlier that day I had seen my mom take the wreath down. As I reach to pull my bedroom shade down, I see a grown-ass man standing right in front of my bedroom. My lights were off. I didn't think he would see me see him. I army crawled into my parents' room. Woke my dad up. "Dad, there's a man outside my window." My dad ran across the hall and leapt over my bed in a single bound. Grabbed my lamp and nearly went through the window at him. Two things I will never forget that night. The profile of that man's face. And the sounds my dad made nearly went through that window. He became an animal. Not sure which was more terrifying. My parents were always protective of me and my sister, especially in parking lots. As I got older, I started to question why they are like that, since we live in a pretty good city and don't even go to places that can be remotely that dangerous. Well, turns out they have 2 cases of almost being abducted in parking lots, one together and just my mom alone. My mom's case was the most intense. If I remember correctly, she was leaving her or a friend's house, walking up to her car when a guy approached her. She spared me the details, but somehow he got her blindfolded on her own passenger seat, made a bunch of treats, and drove them to a gas station. Meanwhile, she was pleading with him not to touch her, take her car, her money, but do nothing to her. At the gas station, he got out of the car, telling my mom not to take the blindfold off, or he would kill her. Somehow she mustered up the courage to take it off, jump to the driver's seat, and drive the hell away from there. She shaked and cried all the way home, called my dad, explained what happened, and asked him to wait for her in front of her house. Just now I realize how strong of a woman she is, 'cause when she got there my father insisted on carrying her inside, but she refused and said, there is no need for it. To this day she hates to stay too long in parking lots, always gets more attentive when we park at night, and one of the first things she told me when I started driving was to get in and out of there quickly. Early 2000s, kids didn't usually carry cell phones. My brother was in elementary school, no older than 10. He was supposed to get home from school on the bus at around 3:30 in the afternoon. The bus stop was a few blocks away and around a corner, so we couldn't see it from our house. One day, the other kids came walking up the street, but not my brother. My parents were confused, but not immediately concerned. My brother was easily distracted and might have gotten sidetracked by a friend or was stacking rocks and sticks down the road. But 3:35, then 3:40, then 3:50 came and went, and there was still no sign of him. So, my parents started to worry. My mom went next door to talk to one of the kids who came home on the bus that was supposed to hold my brother. Meanwhile, my dad took his motorcycle down to the bus stop to see if he encountered my brother along the way. When they both got back, they reported, the kid said that they'd see my brother get on the bus, but wasn't sitting with him and had been engaged in talking to other friends, so they couldn't say with certainty whether or not my brother got off the bus. My dad said there was no sign of him either on the road to the bus stop or in the immediately surrounding neighborhood. He was gone. Time to panic. It being so long ago, I no longer remember the exact details of the rest of the story. I know that my parents called the school and were told that no more students were on campus. I remember my mother crying and my dad yelling at the administrator for losing his son. I remember thinking that the last exchange I had with my brother was a fight over something stupid. Then the phone rang again. It was my brother. From the school. Safe. He had fallen asleep on the bus and missed his stop. He woke shortly after that, before the next stop, and asked to get off. But rather than allowing him to, at his word and the words of the rest of the kids, the substitute bus driver forbade him from leaving at a stop that wasn't his. How would that fool have known anyway, and made him stay on the bus until it returned to the depot at the elementary school, almost an hour after he was supposed to be home. My parents weren't happy. The school tried to deflect blame. My brother got home safely, and that driver was temporarily suspended. It had a happy ending, but sometimes I still have nightmares that it didn't. Not spooky scary, but real life scary. A girl in my grade in school, but after we graduated HS, had a baby in the bathroom of a local sports bar. She then put the baby in the tank of the toilet to die. She came out and resumed hanging out with her friends. She was sent to jail fast. That poor sports bar never recovered. Who wants to eat at the baby murder spot? I was 11 and my mom had left me in the parked car when she ran into the chemist at night. A strange-looking man appeared and sat on the hood of his car, staring intensely at me through the windshield for what felt like 20 minutes, but was probably 5. Each time I discreetly peered over at him, he hadn't budged. Still glaring at me, and it was making me incredibly uncomfortable, but I tried to act unaware. After another minute, a woman approached him, presumably his partner, and I heard through the cracked window, "What about him?" "We can't take him, there's too many people around." I was frozen by the time Mom came back to the car, thinking I'd nearly been abducted. When I was about 12, an older teenage boy tried to drown me in the deep end of the local pool. I was a rep swimmer and was mucking about on the diving boards with my friends, and once I was in the water he pulled me to the bottom of the deep end, 3.5 m deep, and held me down. After fighting him for some time, I managed to break free and swim to the surface, but afterwards I was so confused and distraught that I somehow convinced myself it didn't happen. It was only when I was in my 20s that I remembered it. When I think back now, I know the boy was someone familiar to me, around my older sister's age, but I wouldn't ever be able to give an accurate description. Chances are I saw him every day at school for the next few years and never even realized. I live in a small town in NZ. My big sister and I used to wait outside the back gates of our primary school for our mom to pick us up and walk us home after school. It was quieter at the back gates, and my mom has always been terrible with time management, so she was often late coming to get us. One day, a man in a van drove up and parked on the curb where we were standing and waiting. It was one of the days when our mom was late getting us, so there wasn't anybody around. He started asking us to get into his van, cajoling and joking and then getting irritated. My sister, who at the time must have been 7 to 8 years old, I would have been 5 years old, refused politely, saying she didn't know him and that we weren't supposed to speak to strangers. Luckily, our mom came back in time and when he saw her coming he drove off. I have no memory of it at all, but it freaks me out all the same. My mom spent some of her childhood in Saudi Arabia. Her father worked as an engineer for an airline company and was making some good money. They moved to NZ after a few years in Saudi. My mom told me a few stories about how her and her dad would be walking in the markets together, when soldiers would come along and herd people up to attend beheadings in the local stadium. Her dad would always bundle her up into a store and hide around the back so they wouldn't be herded up with the local population. One day in the markets, she also told me that the soldiers detained a foreign woman whose hair had been showing from underneath her headscarf. They made her kneel in front of everybody and cut all her hair off roughly, making her scalp bleed. A very close friend of the family's, who spent many years emotionally adopted by my parents before getting divorced and moving away, was working as a housekeeper to provide for her son. One night at work, she witnessed 2 men shoot someone and, afraid she would call the police, they kidnapped her in her own car and drove away. That happened the night before my birthday. She was missing for a few days since the police only found her empty car. There was a really unfortunate press from the local police that she had run away, but she would never ever leave her son. He had special needs, and he was really her entire life. She woke up in the morning for him and would never leave him to anyone else. Not even family. After reporting her missing, the police said they had already found her. Those 2 cowards had driven her to a farm outside of town and murdered her, left her there alone behind a barn. They didn't even know that the man they shot had survived, made it to the hospital and gave a witness statement to everything. One of the murderers was caught right away, and the police found his accomplice trying to hide in the attic. I lost contact with her family, so I don't know what came of their criminal trial in August, but I still get so overwhelmed with grief thinking about how the news reported the incident. Everything that she was as a mother, as a friend, as a human being, in her last acknowledgments on earth, she was just Muleshoe woman. That's really scary to me. Many years ago, there was a serial killer loose in our town. He was sending letters to the newspaper that included belongings of his previous victims and was taunting police. A good friend of mine was all kinds of freaked out. She's a true crime fan and she fit the profile of most of the victims, so she knew what that meant. Her kids were in school all day and her husband worked a job about 30 to 45 minutes away, leaving her alone all day long. She was talking about this to her neighbor who said, "No problem. My son likes to eat his lunch in his car every day. I'll let him know your situation so he can park on your street and keep an eye on your house." This made her feel much better. The son was the local dog catcher. The serial killer was BTK. When I was 19, I walked into my house to find one of my kittens with the head chopped off. There was no blood and it looked surgical. All the other cats in the house were hiding, growling, and terrified. Nothing was missing except for a backpack with my work clothes. Before we got to the house, someone was following us. I had a knife upon entering the house that I set on the counter. The knife was missing and then showed up in my mailbox a couple of days later. When we called the police, they interrogated me and my family and seemed to try and blame me because I collected taxidermy and had some in my room. There were many other weird things surrounding this whole ordeal. We never found the head of the kitten or determined what happened. Home alone with a 2-year-old and 7 months pregnant. It was summertime, so the windows were open. I hear a knock on the back door. I look out, there is an adult male, so bloody, I can't tell his race or even hair color. I don't even open the door. I ran to the landline phone to call the police. I'm hysterical. They sent a squad immediately. They don't find anyone, so they leave. I locked myself in a room with a huge knife. The following day, they find a guy unconscious in the yard next door. He'd gotten beat up over a bad drug deal. I will never forget how scared I was. When I was 15, I went on an overnight trip to the Iron Island Museum. It was originally a church/funeral home, and when it was bought, there were still human remains in the basement walls. We were taken on a tour around the museum where they took us to the basement and attic. I didn't go up to the attic, but we all went down to the basement. After the tour, we were given a few hours to do what we wanted before going to bed. There were 2 rooms separated by a divider, with the left one having a Ouija board in it. I'm going to pause and take a moment to tell you one of the major rules for a Ouija board: don't use one in a cemetery. Cemetery is a broad term in this case, but needless to say, we used it. I was sitting in a chair with my back to the back of the room, 2 girls were on my left and right in the other chairs, and multiple others were surrounding us. We asked a few questions when I saw the silhouette of someone walking/floating through the hallway where the 2 rooms were. I pointed towards it, and I knew it was really there when the others had similar expressions of horror on their faces. We said goodbye, always say goodbye, and went to investigate. She was gone. We checked the other room, but we couldn't find her. I decided not to sleep in that room that night, although a few of the girls were braver than me. The next morning, before we're let out, we tried again. I was in the same chair when from the other room an old radio came to life, playing the worst song to be played at that moment. Let's just say none of us wanted to be the last one out of there. Not as crazy as some, but when I was on a trip I saw a beautiful beach and decided to go for a swim. There was no one else swimming, but whatever. Well, now I know why. The waves were so strong twice they pulled me under, and I thought that was at both times. I didn't try a third time. I was told my back was quite bloody from what I'm guessing was sand/stones ripping me. I was too scared to feel pain when it happened, so no idea. Later, I learned that place was called something like the Beach of the Dead because people don't usually come back from it. I'm by no means strong or a good swimmer. Not likely I'd beat the odds. Most of you are going to think I'm making this up, but it's 100% true. Years ago, I visited my friend's apartment for the first time. It was in a nice old house and was a cute apartment, but from the moment I walked in, I felt like something was off about it, like it felt kind of heavy in there. After dinner, we sat talking in the living room. I started seeing these very tall, black shadow figures, like skinny tall humans, walking past the doorway in the hall and at times seeming to peek into the living room. I thought it was just my imagination or a trick of light, but I kept seeing them. Finally, I said to my friend, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but I keep seeing." He interrupted me and said, "The shadow people?" I was like, WTF. He said he sees them all the time. I spent the night in the guest room and was freaked out and couldn't sleep. I saw one standing at the foot of my bed. I shut my eyes and told it, aloud, to leave me alone. I'm not a religious person at all, but I said the Lord's Prayer and it disappeared and I never saw one at his apartment ever again. It was super creepy. After this experience, I have heard lots of similar stories of people seeing shadow people. 3 years ago, I was walking my sister along a creek in the Santa Cruz Mountains, holding my daughter. Absolutely heavenly atmosphere, beautiful day, sunlight, perfect temperatures, etc. Most of the walk felt like vacation, but then I got the worst feeling that I couldn't shake. I kept staring at this one place in the creek, feeling a heavy darkness and sudden fear. 6 months later my sister called me. She found out that Ed Kemper had dumped a victim's body there. I didn't know who he was prior. I've a few things like this happen to me. Extreme intuition? Ig. ETA still creeps me out. I was a cook in an old building. At the time I was in my late 20s. It's hard to describe the basement, but it was shallow, damp, and lopsided, but the business was successful. It was a small business, but an institution in the neighborhood. They'd been open for over 20 years. I opened it, and it was just me. Did my routine like clock and then take my morning activity, lol. Anyway, I went to the basement to fold up some towels before I start prep work. This is just one of many things that's happened to me while working there. So I was in the basement, folding towels, and behind me is the office. It wasn't in a separate room by any means. Folding my towels, I heard a huge crash at the office desk, which is about 20 feet behind me. The desk lamp on the shelf flew off hitting the computer, which turned on and knocked the phone off the hook. I was alone. 10 o'clock in the morning. Like I said, this is just one story. But this is the first time the ghost was in the same room as me, and it seemed pissed.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.